Hello everybody, today I will be talking about brainstorming. I think many of us had a similar experience where we are sitting in a brainstorm and there's this one person that keeps talking over everybody else, that dominate the session, that don't allow other ideas to flourish and create real new original ideas, or a brainstorm session where everybody seems to be like taken aback, nobody's really sharing anything, the mood is not really flowing, the creative spirits are not really going. So I want to take this video, as an opportunity to talk about brainstorm in general. What does it mean? How can we set it up in a way that it's most beneficial? And what are specific strategies that I can use as an individual to create better ideas, have more creative, original ideas, and share them with confidence in the brainstorm session. So this is what we're going to talk about. Let's go. At first, I will start with the brainstorming intro, and then I will share 6 specific strategies that we can use for brainstorming. What's brainstorming? So usually brainstorming means that you gather a group of people together to ideate many ideas quickly, to generate a lot of ideation output, and I would locate it mostly within the ideation phase of the design process. Sometimes it also makes sense at the later stages of the design process, maybe the concept phase, where you already have a solid base for your concept, but you are stuck and maybe you want to ask other people for feedback or improve on certain aspects of the design, like usability or user interface, or you have different shape variations. So it's more like a feedback group ideation that is already in a further developed stage of the product design. But that's much rarer the case, I would say, than the classic brainstorm, where it's really about having bold, creative ideas, original ideas from as many perspectives and directions as possible. Right. So what are the key aspects of a brainstorm? I would say one of the most important aspects is the moderator or the facilitator. That person is really in control of how the brainstorm is structured, how the times are being kept, what the tasks are at hand, how to elaborate on the information at hand, provide background information, all these things. So this is really a key figure for the brainstorm. Then another key aspect is the problem or the question that is being solved during the brainstorm. How is it formulated? Is it specific enough for people to be able to tackle it? Or is it too restrictive for people not even being able to come up with ideas? And also I will talk briefly about the space and the environment of the brainstorm itself, like the local atmosphere that sets everything up for failure or win potentially. The moderator. So as I mentioned before, he leads the session, he provides the background information, right? So usually he introduces the topic to everybody, like what is the product that we're ideating for, or the service, or whatever the problem is. What's our goal, what's our target, what's the background, where does it come from historically potentially. So he is responsible to give everybody a solid base to ideate from, so there's no huge gaps in understanding of the problem or where things are supposed to go. He also usually is the person to make sure that the tools and the time are being used as set. It's not like he has to plan everything. There can also be many different people, but for during the session, this person is at least responsible for saying, okay, now you have 10 minutes, and keep the watch, like set up the timer. Also say, okay, now we will be using the icebreakers, for example, to further our ideation, or now we are going to do a break. So this is really important, right? Because when you as a group feel stuck, then the facilitator can potentially help to get unstuck, resolve the stuck, and further the ideation generation. And also that person is key in making sure that every person present participating in the brainstorm is being heard. So, I mean, we are different personalities. Some are more shy or not as confident and bold with talking about ideas they have, even though I think every person has something to contribute to an ideation session. So the role of the facilitator is also to make sure that every voice is being heard, that every person can contribute and is contributing also, and not just relying on others to ideate and just basically sitting there and waiting for time to pass. So that's the facilitator. Usually the facilitator does not partake in the ideation actively. It's more like the framework around it, right? So that can be you if it's like we usually see it with graduation students, that they have to do like some research and they will hold the brainstorm. They know all the basics, all the background. They will ask us then as a panel of designers to tackle a certain problem while overseeing the process. Then the next key aspect I was mentioning is the problem and questions, right? So is there a clearly stated problem? I always come back to that same thing, like for ideation, for designing, it's really important to have a problem clearly identified and stated, communicated, because the more clear it is formulated, the more easy it's also to solve. And the more direct the solution can be worked on. So I think this is really, really important. Like there are some systematic ideation strategies like TRIZ, for example, that is all about how to formulate the problem at first, in the first place, to be able to solve it. Or Albert Einstein once also said, right, or apparently is quoted for having said that he spent, I don't know how much time on formulating the problem and then just like a fraction of the time on the solution actually. So what are the relevant constraints that we have to consider during the ideation, and where do we have the freedom to go beyond those constraints? And also, because usually we do this for a specific overarching goal, like advance our studies, advance the research field, or advance the business, like create value with the product design at one point that is marketable. And so the problem has to be considerate of all these factors, right? And give us the right aim to shoot for during the session. And another aspect that I was talking about is the space and the environment. From my personal experience, I feel like an open space where the group even has space to sit is great to have, but also you want maybe even a little bit more space. So sometimes people stand up, want to talk, or they get up and have to put post-it notes on a certain wall. So you need space to facilitate these actions, right? You don't want everybody cramped and restrictive. There's also this psychological effect. I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but it's something like the church dome effect or something, where they said that people tend to also use completely different language in, for example, churches where you are like in big halls, but they also translated that to other spaces that are just more vast and grand and big, that also your language expands. The word you're using is like more grand, more open, more wide. So I think this is a really interesting aspect and another factor that we can try to facilitate or work into our brainstorm session. I mean, obviously we are restricted by what we have available to us, but even within the space, like taking away a table or two could potentially create more air to breathe for the people, or the arrangement of the chairs, small groups, multiple small groups compared to one large group. So try to think about these things also when you plan a brainstorm or when you go into one. Try to understand the setting and how you can use the environment potentially to trigger original ideas. Also, obviously, if it's decorated creatively, if there's greenery around you that can all contribute to a more creative brainstorm session. All right, those were the basics for Brainstorm. Now we go into the 6 strategies that I want to share with you today. So the 6 strategies that I selected for today's video are the Diversify, the Icebreakers, Evolve, Relate, Analogies, and Isolate. So now let's go over them one by one. Diversify. So for brainstorm session, you really want to have a group that is as diverse as can be, right? Because people from different backgrounds and different domains come together and mix, and they can shed a new light on the same problem. And I think it really helps. Do you have users for the potential product that you're designing that you could integrate? Do you have people from different ages and can learn or utilize their understanding of a problem that stems from different times, different cultures, different zeitgeists, right? So all these different people from different domains can really give us a more holistic understanding of the problem and also provide more holistic solution ideas. Obviously, that's not a strategy that you apply for yourself, right? It's dependent on the panel, and maybe you don't even have a say in that. But what you can do if you want to up your brainstorming game, either way, you can imagine or try to imagine what other people would say. For example, what would my grandmother say if she were to think about that problem? And just by doing that mental switch, you already find a new approach for the same problem, and that frees you from your own restrictive thoughts potentially. Or what would my niece or my nephew say? What would my plumber say? Or what would the CEO say of, like, I don't know, the biggest company out there? What would AI say? What would like anything say? So just by role switching potentially, you can find new avenues to ride the ideation wave. So I think Diversify also, apart from just trying to have a really diverse group in there, you can diversify your thinking by taking on different roles. The next strategy are the icebreakers. So what are icebreakers? So they are usually light and easy assignments, tasks, setups for everybody to follow along, so everybody can get into the right state, into the mood, get the creative juices flowing, right? So it's like sort of a warm-up exercise for creative thinking, and it also pushes for more bold ideas, or it creates an environment where people feel like the bold ideas are valued and allowed, right? If it's a playful setup, then people can also be funny and joke a little bit around, and that will also allow for the ongoing process of the brainstorm to be more funny and out there. And it also can help when you feel like the session is like stuck, then use icebreakers to get unstuck and to try different things. So there are 3 different icebreakers that I want to introduce today. Those would be the word associations, what ifs, and systematic thinking. So what are word associations? So there are 2 different types of word associations that I have seen being used in brainstorm sessions, and that would be one, the rapid fire word associations, right? So you have one word, or at least one clear, not a sentence, but like representative word pair potentially of the problem, and now everybody just basically is allowed to say anything that they associate with that word. So it's being written down like all at once. So everybody can just like get loose of all the initial thoughts that burst out of their mind. What are the main associations they have with the problem? And that way you can really also at one point group things and see if you missed certain things at a later stage, because that was mentioned several times, but we didn't come up with an idea, or we didn't consider it during the ideation. So now we can go back and see all these associations that we have. That would be one, rapid fire associations. The other one is forced connections. So sometimes people just bring up like really not random words. Yeah, it's random words, or not at all related to the problem words. And now with this exercise, with this icebreaker, they would say, okay, the problem is like, I don't know, you have a camera and the camera is for a certain target group, whatever, maybe for military use, I don't know. But then the assignment is to connect rainbow, the word rainbow, to it. What does that do with your thinking? Where does your mind go when you have to look at your problem, but also have to consider rainbow with it? Does it impact the way the color is? Or is rainbow potentially triggering some ideas about different filters, different lenses the camera can use? Or there's the word ranch, I don't know, farming. And then you immediately start to look at the problem differently, and like by forcing yourself to connect two completely separate domains, there is a space that is being created with original and new potential for something that hasn't been there before, that you wouldn't think of if you go straight on. So that would be the word associations, right? Then we have the what ifs. With the what ifs are statements or sub-questions to the main question, and that you have to consider during the session. They can be of the type constraints, so changing different constraints, of context type, perspective, and time. So I will give you an example for each of those. So the constraint what if would be, what if it had to cost half as much? So you have a product, what if it had to cost half as much? Like, what would that change? Or what if it needed to be twice as big? What if it had to run on like a fraction of the energy output? What if it had to be working with different connectors from all over the world, right? So try using different constraints, even though they might not be like, you don't have to actually in reality fulfill those constraints, but just by playing with these what ifs, they potentially help you find aspects that you can work on that are highly valuable, interesting. Then the context what if could be, what if the problem were designed for animals instead of humans? Like, how would that look if it were designed for a rabbit? Or if it were to be designed for a completely different use environment, not an industrial environment, but a consumer related environment, a cafe, outdoors. How would that impact the design? So again, like the overall idea is here to break free from the original path and try new approaches, shed new lights on the problem, right? The perspective what if could be potentially, what if your product could talk? Like, switch the perspective. What if your product could talk to you? What would it tell you? And then the time what if would be, what if this product existed in 100 years? How would that be different? Or what if it were to be developed 50 years ago? What would be different, right? So I think you clearly understand that these questions that lead to different solutions than if they were not being posed as they were. And the last icebreaker strategy that I cover is the systematic thinking strategy. So there's this tool called SCAMPER, where each letter stands for like something that you can think of, right? So it is not so much like, I don't feel like it's very a creative exercise because it's so systematic and structured, but it still can help you if you're stuck or if you want to go into more detail and dive into an idea to find different approaches or solutions. So the S stands for substitute. So what materials could you replace? What functions could you replace? What users could you replace? The C stands for combine. So are there certain components that you can combine into one, certain functions that you can merge together? If it's a flashlight, can you also give it a laser pointer, for example, or a UV light? Like, can you merge functions together? Can you merge components together? The electric circuit, like the housing, what can you combine? Adapt. Can you borrow from other industries? So modify also. Can you change scale or intensity? Right? Do you really need like the entire range of brightness for a torch, for a light? Or is like a certain smaller range enough? And how big does it need to be? Like, where can you modify? Can you put it to other use? So this P of SCAMPER stands for put to other use. Could it serve a different function, right? If it's a light, and can it also serve like a different function altogether? Like, I don't know, is it a knife as well in EDM circles or whatever? The E stands for eliminate. Is there anything that you can remove while still maintaining the core value, right? I really like this part of the SCAMPER method. I use it also many times because I feel like at the beginning I'm trying to pack everything into one idea, and it becomes like a complex thing that is like a little bit further away from the main original core that it had or that it was supposed to have. And now by stripping away all the unnecessary feature, you also go back to minimalism, Japanese style, potentially only have what's absolutely necessary, form follows function, nothing beyond that, right? So try to strip away as much as you can to see what is really the core of the product and does it still solve the issue. And the last letter would be the R, reverse. Does it help potentially to swap the sequence or the orientation of something? So depending on the problem, this can be really like eye-opening. All right, maybe we first have to do this switch and then something happens in order for something else to happen. It's really abstract when you don't have a specific example, but I do feel that there are quite some situations out there where this could be like a helpful now I will talk about the evolve strategies, right? So if you're sitting in a brainstorm and you feel like you don't really have any good ideas, so I would suggest to use the evolve strategy, right? It takes the pressure off of your shoulders to create something of your own by making sure that you just take somebody else's idea and you evolve it. You add on top of their idea, you build it, you deepen it. So that also helps deepen the understanding of the problem and the solution, and it improves the quality of the output, right? So a brainstorm is about all like numbers and high idea count, right? But you also want to have actually good ideas that can be used later on. So if you deepen and evolve some of those ideas further, you're already going a step further, and you really bring out the quality of some of the ideas that really start to shine only after they were evolved a little bit further. Sometimes I feel like an idea is really stupid at first, but then somebody else jumps on it and takes it somewhere that I didn't see at the first place, and now it starts to make sense. Now everything comes together, and that is like a really valuable skill to have, right? To take other people's ideas and build on top of them, work with them, and see where things go from here. The next strategy is the relate strategy. So this is all about you as an individual, right? Utilize your individuality. How does the product relate to you as a person? I think this is really strong because you can potentially share relevant and personal experiences that you had with the product beforehand. So it elevates your position, right? Because now you're not just a designer of a product, but you're also a user of the product and you understand a problem on a personal, deeper level. So you're being established as some sort of relevant expert, or at least user of the problem and the product that can further deepen the understanding of the whole thing. And also, I feel like by sharing personal experiences with the product, you cannot really go wrong, right? If you had a product and you used it and you identified the problem, you cannot be wrong because that's the experience that you have, that's the problem that you felt, and it might be like a very niche problem that only you perceive, but it's still a problem that you perceived. So it cannot be just invalidated easily, and I don't think it will be if the people present are not like rude or morons. So yeah, I think also it integrates the individual strength of the people present into the ideation process if they are open to share their personal experience with the product and their personal relation to the product, right? I remember I once worked like on a product that was a little bit difficult for some people because it was about helping people that didn't want to keep on living any longer to have a self-determined death, essentially. So for some people, that was really a hard border where they were not able to contribute to that session because it felt like, okay, we don't want to take part in taking people's lives, even if that's their wholehearted, free decision of their own, right? So, but by sharing their doubts, the feelings that they had for that problem and that product, the people that were still willing to work on that problem could take these doubts and fears into consideration and develop something that is also more considerate of the surrounding, of the user, of the end user, and also the relations of the end user in the end, right? So I think this can be a really helpful strategy for sure. Relate. The next one is analogies, right? So we have a product in one domain, and what if we ask ourselves, what else has to solve a similar problem, right? There are other domains out there that often have similar issues with existing solutions that work. Maybe it's just like a different scale that it operates on. But there's often somebody has already solved the problem that we're looking at. We're just not aware of it, or we haven't made the connection, right? For example, if you have to pump liquid through a hose, right? There's probably some mechanism in the medical world that has to do that, like really reliably, really precise. But there's also like the oil rig company that like move hundreds, thousands of liters a day. How do they do it? What's the difference? Do they use the similar principles or not? Can I take some of these for whatever problem I have at hand? And that way you can also do different projects, different products with different domains, right? Or also look at nature. What does nature have in terms of solutions? I just was reading about peristaltic pumps, right? So they're really smart pump systems where very little friction, little maintenance, very little moving parts. And then there was this research group that they found that there is some mechanisms in leaves that also allows to create certain pressure within the cells of the leaf to move liquids continually instead of having them pulsate. And that is one of the issues with peristaltic pumps, is that the water jet or the liquid comes out in pulses. So they were just looking at nature and found a new solution to that, right? So I think nature for sure is like a big inspiration, but also other industries, other fields, right? So it can help you get out of fixations, create strong ideas because they already have been validated in other domains. And it can also lead to non-obvious ideas, right? So I think analogies is also a really strong strategy that you can use to up your brainstorming game. And the last strategy that I'm going to talk about is the isolate. So there are several studies already now that indicate that ideating by yourself at first and only joining a group in a second step improves the idea quality because it avoids the problem that I stated in the intro, right? That there's one person that dominates the session and blurs out everybody else. So by allowing people to work for themselves at first, you capture the essence of their thoughts, their perspectives, and then you obviously also have to have everybody share their initial ideas or have activities where you pass around the ideas so other people can build on top of that. and then you come together as a group and talk about all these things, is a much more successful approach, effective approach than just start as a group all together. Potentially also personality dependent, right? Who is part of the group. Also, it can help avoid fixation in the early stages, because what you sometimes see in brainstorm sessions is that there are 3-4 ideas being explored and they seem sort of realistic, promising, and then people start to get fixated onto these ideas and they stop going beyond and exploring other directions. But if you start solo first, then this is much less likely to happen, because you already started with a much wider pool of ideas and with completely different perspectives from the get-go. And yeah, as I mentioned before, we have different personalities, and some people are just better when they are allowed to think on their own, ideate on their own, where they feel less pressure, where they can focus more deeply, where they can apply their own thinking strategies and patterns without the pressure of being watched at or being forced to express their ideas like immediately. So by isolating, you can really utilize that strategy for your own good, and also potentially you can propose it to the entire group if it would be fine to potentially have just like 10-minute initial solo ideation where you write things down or you sketch things down before you go together as a group. So this is the last strategy that I wanted to share with you today. I hope there's something you can take from this video, that you find the strategies that serve you and that help you improve your ideation output in brainstorm sessions, that help you grow in confidence in brainstorm sessions. And I'm pretty sure the more often you try and use them, the more self-aware and assured you can be. And from my experience, if you have the right group of people, every contribution is being valued and will ultimately lead to a better solution. So just express your ideas and your feelings, and you will be surprised how many of them can actually lead to something bigger, better, being deepened and evolved into like a really great idea solution. All right, that was all of it from my side. Thank you very much. See you around. Peace.